The master of the 8th Legion is known across the Imperium, from the Underhive Ganger to any of the regions of Terra. His name is spoken in hushed terror or quiet reverence, a symbol of justice in a chaotic galaxy, the true face of terror, an instrument of destruction, a monster whose depravity knows no bounds, or, as some people like to jokingly put it, Warhammer's Batman. All of these descriptors are true, and each one colors a different view of the mighty Night Haunter. With all that being said, there is a duality to this character. We see a hated traitor on one hand. We also see a Primarch that is so painfully self-aware that it ultimately becomes his undoing. In our video today, we're going to talk about Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter, the Primarch of the Night Lords, 8th Legion of the Adeptus Legionis. This one is a long time coming, and it's going to cover a lot of dense information. I think of all the Primarch videos I've done, this one will probably be one of the larger ones. For a character that wasn't even present during the Siege of Terra, he has intersected with almost every major plot point of the Horus Heresy, and even then, he has a pretty heavily documented post-heresy story. We're going to go through each one of these avenues, exploring the Night Haunter's early life on Nostromo to his self-prophesized end. So join me and let us walk a razor's edge into the depths of the madness that is Konrad Curze. As with all the Primarchs, our story begins on a far-flung planet, deep within the Ultima Segmentum, amongst the ghoul stars on the hive world of Nostromo. This might be the first Primarch we've discussed that doesn't actually land on a death world. Nostromo, being classified as a hive world prior to its destruction, does not make it any less of a deadly planet though. During the Dark Age of technology, it's evident that the world of Nostromo was a thriving planet, with 5 major cities dotting the landscape. Even with the collapse of man's former grand interstellar empire, Nostromo maintained trade routes to other planets, using its chief export as a way to maintain its relatively rich status. The entire planet of Nostromo is covered in adamantium, the substance used to make a number of the strongest armors and constructs in the Imperium. Terminator armor, Titans, what have you. But the star of Nostromo's system is dying and fading, and as thus, hardly any light reaches the planet. Whatever light that does eke its way through the solar system is also further blocked by Tenebror, the planet's moon. All of that does nothing to speak of the sad state of the populace of Nostromo. While on paper, Nostromo seems like a solid planet with a valued trade commodity and thriving cities, the latter could not be further from the truth. The citizenry of Nostromo is relegated to abject poverty, crushed into submission to work in the many mines across the planet's surface. The planet is then ruled over by a tyrannical class of nobles. The ruling caste, in turn, is not just the rich elite, but they are also leaders of various criminal syndicates and cartels that operate throughout the cities of Nostromo. These criminal operations then rule all elements of the base Nostromo populace, a lawless land of gang violence with no policing. Total anarchy reigns as the strong rule the weak in a constant cycle of violence, thievery, and death. The overcrowded city's population is brought in check by both constant murder and near endless suicides from the depressed lower class. I mean, the entire planet is wreathed in night. This is not the first time we've heard of a planet with high suicide rates because they couldn't open their windows to anything but perpetual night. This is the planet that Konrad Curze lands into. A planet of night, a planet of crime, a planet in need of justice. His gestation pod crashes into Nostromo Quintus, the 5th of the mighty 5 cities. Cracking the adamantium crust, Curze's pod sent him deep into the geosphere of the planet. It's recorded that people saw a human child crawl its way from the fissure created by the pod, dripping liquid metal. But now, whether this is an exaggeration or not, we do know that his pod cracked the surface, which is in no way a foreshadowing to something later that I will come back to, I promise. Hint. It is. Unlike the other Primarchs, Curze was not found by some wayward hunter or discovered by a benevolent father who raised him with all the humble qualities of greatness. Nay, Curze had absolutely none of that. The child Primarch raised himself, watching the inhabitants of the city and killing feral creatures within the sewers and streets of Nostromo Quintus. He learned how to kill by watching murderers and gang members take the lives of innocent citizens. Watching them stalk and set traps for their unsuspecting prey, he did the same. When animals became too scarce, he eventually hunted humans and ate them. Alone, lost, and isolated from the world, Konrad Curze hid away from the city, wearing the clothes of dead victims and sleeping in the sheltered outcroppings deep in the Underhive. His dreams were filled with the frantic visions of the great wars and battles to come on planets he couldn't fathom. Now, it's important to remember that this isn't just some lost boy who couldn't find the last star on the left on his way to Neverland. This is still a Primarch. So there are a lot of intrinsic and instinctive behaviors that Curze will have to take advantage of, or he does take advantage of. His superhuman physiology is one of note, allowing him to overpower full-grown men even as a boy. But this would obviously extend to all of his senses and intuition, allowing him to evade anyone and anything the better he got at hiding away. The Night Hunter was a pale and gaunt figure, standing quite tall, taller than even a normal Primarch. His thin frame belied his otherwise ferocious strength. Black eyes stared out from the polished veneer of his porcelain face as a dirty, wet slop of black hair cascaded over his face and onto his shoulders. Dirty and blood-stained teeth could be seen from the rictus grin that Konrad Curze wore as a badge to his position. Most of the Primarchs spent their short-lived youth honing some form of skill set. Curze, like Corax, honed his ability to stalk in the shadows, but unlike Corax, also his ability to murder. Before the Emperor discovers Nostromo, though, Curze had completely quelled the turbulent planet of Nostromo, removing the corrupt noble class and replacing them with himself as ultimate monarch of the planet. Posed with the decision between dying or serving Curze, all the ruling elements left alive became subservient to the Night Hunter. As the Dark King of Nostromo, he was actually a very good ruler. He took to consuming all the knowledge that the books of the nobility had to offer, pouring through volumes and learning the wisdom that his brothers would have consumed years prior. The people of Nostromo knew peace, for once in a very long time. A strenuous peace, but peace nonetheless. Any crime that was committed, Curze himself went out to punish, sometimes disfiguring the corpses so much that they could not be identified, or broadcasting their screams through the loudspeaker of the city for all to hear for hours on end. On one hand, you had a ruler that was just and fair, able to reason through some of the harder issues that the planet had faced as it continued its exportation of adamantium to neighboring planets. On the other hand, you had the terrifying result of a singular justice system. Curze did not set up some sort of grand policing or judicial branch. It was all him. The Night Hunter would insist upon bringing justice to anyone that would break the laws of the Dark King. And we touched on this a bit earlier, but I really want to flesh out a big portion of Curze. His ability to see the future. It's what has influenced him so greatly up to this point. Like I said, he can see the future of those he's about to kill, or even the ones that he meets. We see in a lot of other publications that he can see the future of just some of his sons. But his dreams are filled with the visions of him fighting in a grand crusade at the head of one of his father's armies. Curze had already gleaned who, or at least what, he was from these very visions, much like his brother Sanguinius, who knew that his father was coming for him. When the Emperor arrived on Nostromo, it wasn't some singular or shrouded figure like we get with Leman Russ. Instead, he marched through the city of Nostromo Quintus on foot, a grand delegation of light, it was called. Rogaldorn, Ferrus Manus, Lorgar, and Fulgrim all joined the Emperor with their respective legions as they marched to the palace that Konrad Curze ruled from. As they slowly marched through the city, they came to a stop as Konrad Curze stood at the foot of the palace steps, awaiting them. You get this very strong moment in the books where each one of the other Primarchs introduces himself to Curze, who in turn sees each one's distant future or death. The first one to approach is Rogaldorn, who he sees quote-unquote dragged down by 1,000 murderers. Next is Lorgar, whom he gets a glimpse of in his demon Primarch form, I guess you could say, consumed by the ruinous powers. Third is Ferrus Manus, who Curze sees decapitated, his head clutched by a giant in regal purple armor and silver hair. The last one, the aforementioned giant, is Fulgrim, the only one of his brothers that Curze seems to have an immediate kinship with. Konrad can't actually see Fulgrim's future though, only an image of him as something akin to a snake, laughing in the darkness of the vision. This is obviously a nod to Fulgrim ascending to a demon prince of Slaanesh. Lastly, the Emperor strides forth, and we get an awesome exchange between the two. The Emperor says, "Be at peace, Konrad Curze. I have arrived, and I intend to take you home." Curze responds with, "That is not my name, Father. My name is Night Haunter, and I know full well what you intend for me." Ooh, sends a shivers up my spine. But from that moment on, Konrad Curze joined the Great Crusade for the Emperor and the Imperium of Man. Fulgrim would become both his mentor and closest confidant as the leader of the Emperor's children, taught Konrad the ways of the galaxy and how to wage war at the head of a legion of Space Marines. The 8th Legion would be renamed the Night Lords in a nod to their new home planet of Nostromo, the planet of Eternal Night. As a quick aside, the Legion's Terran-born members actually have a very similar heritage to that of Nostromo, most if not all of them being former prisoners or at least some form of gang member or something of the sort, who survived by sneaking and murdering their way to the top of the food chain. Pale skin and quiet demeanor matched well with that of Nostromo. Konrad Curze instructed his legionnaires on how to use fear as their ally, decking their armor out with various effigies and trophies that would instill fear in the enemy. Trophy heads, chains, grotesque bat wings, the dollar menu at Arby's, pictures of exes long lost, just anything that brought up notions of terror. His sons would spread fear in the name of the Emperor. They would become the tools of terror that the Emperor wielded to ensure justice was meted out and peace was kept. They would do this wreathed in midnight clad, a reference to their dark blue, silver, and black color scheme, which eventually, of course, moved to become a black or dark blue, gold, and blackish lightning color scheme. The recruits brought from Nostromo were originally of the finest stock the planet had to offer, oftentimes being the educated noble-born of the elite, sometimes sons or cousins. This did well to suit the ideals of the Legion. You have to remember that during the earliest portions of the Great Crusade, the Night Lords weren't these psychopathic murderers that we know them in the latter portions of the Horus Heresy or even in the current lore. There was a very strong sense of justice about the Legionnaires, and they understood that the ends justify the means. This is lamented in various publications where Curze, towards the end of the heresy, remarks that he sees his sons as individuals who pursue the means as a perversion to their own desires. As the Great Crusade drew onward and more Primarchs were discovered, Konrad Curze's Legion was making a name for itself. Entire systems would fall in line at the mere mention of the Night Lords. This was because of the brutality that they would impart on any planet breaking compliance or resisting the Emperor's light. The ultimate goal for the Night Lords was to slaughter a few thousand in horrific displays to save the lives of millions. Adding to that was the notion that the Night Lords had performed an exterminatus order on a few planets already for, seemingly small transgressions. Vindication, you'll come to learn, is the prime objective of the Night Lord. Crime needs to be brought to justice, and punishment must be dealt. I haven't hammered that point home enough. To quote the Konrad Curze Primarch series, "The few must die in pain, so that many can live in peace. Fear is the road to civilization. It is paved with bone and washed with blood, but the destination forgives the sin of the journey." This tale of savagery extended for many decades into the Great Crusade, with the murderous tendencies of the Night Lords increasing as their legion became corrupt from the inside out. And this is traced back to Ashkar Skravok, a count within the Nostroman nobility. You see, while Curze was away, the fear of punishment that had gripped the populace had begun to slip, realizing that there was no one around to keep the peace that the Night Haunter had fought for so long. Also, since Curze did not appoint any kind of police force or leave behind elements of the Night Lords to ensure the peace was kept, Nostromo fell back into its natural corruptive state. Skravok led a coup where he replaced the Imperial Governor. From there, he emptied the many prisons of Nostromo, sending the lowest and worst of the planet out to the Legion rather than the best and brightest. Gendor Skravok, a distant cousin of Ashkar, was all too eager to reinforce the nationalist behavior of his family member. As a Talon Master of the Night Lords, he trained more and more of the ex-convicts sent to the Legion. The result was an army that killed for pleasure, and even stalked their own ships, slaying mortals to further their own perverted desire. This is where the slow spiral of Curze begins. With the increasing brutality and lawlessness of the recruits sent to replace his better sons, he grew a disdain for his own legion. They had moved away from becoming these grand instruments of terror and justice and transformed into simple barbarism. Konrad Curze fell far before their heresy even started. Maybe not directly from the Emperor's light, but his mental stability started to wane as he grew more distant from his legion. He noted the greed and single-minded behavior of the entire legion save for his first captain. Curze's visions had also become more frequent and longer, occurring in the middle of the day at times. Konrad would be lost for hours or even days on end, howling, slaughtering, and destroying everything in his sight. There are two Night Lords of note that I want to bring up at this time that are within Curze's Cryoptera, or his 7 most trusted and closest sons. The first one is Shang, the equerry to Konrad Curze. Next to the first captain, Shang is one of the most trusted members of the Legion. Curze sees Shang's admiration and essentially love for himself as a weakness, one that he willingly exploits. At the same time, he knows that this is to be kind of a strength, because amongst all of his sons, Shang and the first captain are the only one, or the only two, that he can trust. The second, and probably the most important character in the Night Lord's history next to Konrad himself, is Iago Sevatar Sevatarian, or Sevatar is his nickname. And I don't want to go too deeply into this character, as like Sigismund, he deserves his own video, he truly does. But Sevatar is Konrad's favored son, and during this increasing time of madness, the Night Haunter leans on Sevatar the most. He knows that Shang will always be loyal, but he understands that Sevatar is the only one of his sons that sees his plan in its entirety. I mean, Sevatar is the only person that Curze gives a nickname to in Sev. It's a double nickname. Sevatar is his nickname, and then Curze gives him the nickname of Sev. You know, from their older days in the Nostrum Frat Society, where they would have human flaying contests. Sevatar's lore is wide-spanning, and we still don't quite know what happens to him, but he bears the badass title of the Prince of Crows. Curze used Sev's singular dedication to the vision of the Night Lords to help root out some of the corruption, but, as the Primarch put it, the snake's bite had already poisoned the body, and a plan would be devised to sever the snake's head so that it might never bite again. As the plan's foundation was being formulated, the Night Lords rendezvoused with Fulgrim and Rogel Dorn in the Charot system. There, Curze and Fulgrim would reunite and help soothe some of the fits that Curze was having. Alongside his brother and once mentor, the two fought side by side throughout the campaign of Charot. As fate would have it, one of the more vicious episodes would fall upon Curze. This led to a moment where Konrad confided in his brother, telling him of the visions he saw. Constantly, the Primarch was haunted by prophecies of brother killing brother as other Primarchs fought a war eternal amongst the stars. Space Marine would fight Space Marine, as Horus turned from the Emperor to wage his own war. This is truly the first person who really hears about these visions in their entirety, and this is far before the drop site massacres. Unsure of really what to do with this information, Fulgrim told Dorn what Curze had confided in him. This, as you can imagine from a terse and rigid Primarch such as Dorn, did not end very well. After the system had fallen into compliance, or at least for the most part, Curze and Dorn were overseeing a mass exodus of refugees. Dorn had taken issue with the Night Lords' using of brutality to keep the people in check, flaying some of the citizens to scare the rest into submission. This leads to a very interesting exchange between Curze and Dorn, where Curze explains that without the fear of consequence, people will never remain loyal to the Emperor. This is exemplified by giving a gun to a random refugee and asking her to shoot him, simultaneously ordering his men not to kill her if she does as he commands. And as Curze turned his back, the refugee raised the gun, but was immediately killed by Curze. This sent Dorn into an outrage, who tried to convey that this did not create loyalty but merely obedience. Drumming up the conversation between Curze and Fulgrim, Dorn admonished his brother. Confronting the Night Haunter, Curze flew into a fit of rage, attacking Rogel Dorn and slaying a number of his sons. The books pretty clearly make it out that had Rogel Dorn not been who he was, he would have died. And as he was mauled badly by Curze's twin lightning claws, mercy and forgiveness. Curze is then quickly ushered off the planet by the Night Lords like an inmate after a prison shanking. Once in orbit, he plots a course for Nostromo and looks to exact his plan he had started before meeting up at the Charot system. As the entire Night Lord's fleet enters the Nostroman system, Konrad Curze prepares to issue the command to all of his ships to fire upon the location that his gestation pod landed on Nostromo so many years ago, the pod having created a crack in the otherwise armored shell of the planet. Sevatar leads the Atramentar, the elite Terminator honor guard of the Night Lords, from ship to ship, quelling any portions of the Night Lords that refuse the order to fire upon Nostromo, ensuring that the Dark King's rule is not tested by his sons any longer. In these final moments, Konrad Curze looks on from the deck of Nightfall, the Legion's flagship, as lance battery after lance battery hammers into the crust of the planet. The entire fleet foregoing the typical exterminatus bombs in exchange for a more brutal display of destruction and vindication. Completely cracking open the planet, the salvo eventually destroys the corrupted heart of the Legion, the source of the corruption deep within the Night Lord. The head of the snake was severed. And like I said earlier, this all occurs 2 decades prior to the Dropsite Massacre, and from this point, the Night Lords seemingly go rogue, bringing planets into compliance but answer to no one as their brutality reaches its ultimate height. After the events of Istvan III, the Night Lords are ordered to join up with the Loyalist elements at Istvan V to bring an end to the traitorous Horus and the legions that had joined him. As a quick aside, I don't understand why they were brought in to do this after they already attacked Rogel Dorn and were pretty much off the rocker. There were Imperial elements that saw at the last moments the Night Lord Legion blowing up Nostromo. So it kind of is a little bit of a weird story loophole, and I think that they kind of thought, well, he's really good at murdering. What we need him to do right now is murder, and then we'll bring him back in. So I'm not really sure what happens, but along with the Iron Warriors, the Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion, the Night Lords met in secret upon Lorgar's flagship to orchestrate the treachery that would soon become the Istvan V Dropsite Massacre. Before the meeting is concluded, Sevatar yells a shout that would become the war cry for the traitorous legions for many years to come throughout the Long War. Death, the false emperor. On the planet of Istvan V, as the massacre played its hand, and after Pharaoh Manus' own head was cut off by Fulgrim, just as Konrad Curze had predicted, Corvus Corax and Lorgar Aurelian met in single combat. Corvus was the better fighter and slowly got the upper hand against Lorgar, flashing his face with his claws and cursing him through his anger-gritted teeth. As Corvus's claws punctured through the word-bearer Primarch's stomach and out the other side of his body, Lorgar's life was saved at the last minute by Konrad Curze. Being beaten back by his brother, Corvus flew away from the engagement, his claw a ruin as the laughing face of Curze looked up at him. Now, I want to take a quick kind of step outside of the narrative to talk about the relationship between Corax and Curze. They have a very similar approach to warfare. I mean, Curze even says to Corax's face, far before the Dropsite massacres, "I am a simple tool like you. We have different uses, though identical edges." And it's true. I mean, the legions themselves look the same. They have these very pitch black eyes and very pale skin. Both the Raven Guard and the Night Lords use fear to an end, but the Night Lords believe that fear is to be used on a populace, while the Raven Guard are more guerrilla fighters who use hit-and-run tactics. Both ply their trade through the shadows of the galaxy, furthering their father's great work using stealth. But even Sevatar remarks on Corax's ability to hide in plain sight, and Konrad himself remarks how while he was able to use the shadows, Corvus was the true master of them, able to bend them to his will. There's almost an admiration you get from Konrad's words as they, or at least as the way he talks about Corvus in the many memoirs attached to his Primarch book, remarking that they had a very similar upbringing, both suffering through worlds of poverty and forced mining communities, both pushing their way to the top to deliver justice. But Corvus' story is one of brotherhood and companionship, while Konrad's is a tale of solidarity and madness. Getting back on track here, after the events of Istvan, it's evident that fully half of the Emperor's legions are in open rebellion with the other, and the Horus heresy begins across the galaxy. Konrad Curze takes Vulcan of the Salamander's Legion prisoner, torturing and killing him multiple times. And I cover this pretty in-depth during the video on Vulcan, so I'll let you go through it there, as it's really more a tale of Vulcan than it is of Curze. But Vulcan ends up escaping and using his hammer to teleport him to a random point in the galaxy, which just so happens to be the Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge, a planet we will come back to, I promise. Now that the heresy was in full motion, Horus dispatched the traitorous legions to deal with the elements of the loyalist ones, hoping to keep Terra isolated from reinforcing elements. The Night Haunter was deployed to Swagwalsa, a distant world in the eastern fringe. There, he would stall and delay the Dark Angels Legion by fighting them in a series of small engagements aimed at guarding Horus's flank and waylaying Lionel Johnson from reinforcing Terra. The two met on the dread planet of Swagwalsa, Lionel Johnson accompanied by his captains Corswain and Alejos, and Konrad Curze accompanied by Sevatar and another captain. They both parlayed. The conversation started civil enough before tensions arose as Curze insulted the Lion and in return was struck by his brother. The two immediately devolved into a conflict, with Curze above the Lion slowly strangling the master of the First Legion. As Alejos was struck down by Sevatar, Corswain went to help his liege lord, driving his sword through Conrad's body. The captains then recalled their respective Primarchs as reinforcements were brought down and a full-scale battle erupted on the planet. The Night Lords then enacted a series of fighting retreats, never staying in a prolonged engagement with the Dark Angels. The Lion chased the Night Haunter through the eastern fringe mercilessly, seeking to bring his crazed brother to heel. Eventually, the Dark Angels laid an elaborate trap within the system, and as the Night Lords fell into it, the entire might of the First Legion was brought to bear, smashing apart many capital ships of the Eighth Legion. The Night Lords scrambled to flee from the trap, seeking to gain the upper hand and come back, but their back had been broken. An entire quarter of the Legion was lost, and Konrad Curze himself was mortally wounded by the Lion in another duel. In a comatose state, leadership of the Legion fell to the Cryoptera, with only 3 captains remaining: Sevatar, Malithos Kuln, and Captain Herrick. Herrick and Kuln advocated for reorganizing the Legion, answering blood with blood, and bringing the fight to the Dark Angel. Sevatar, on the other hand, knew that the battle was lost. The Dark Angels outnumbered the Night Lords, and were, as a whole, a better prepared and equipped legion. Sevatar also knew that the Night Lords would only answer to one individual, not 3. So he teleported all of his Atramentar into the meeting room with the other 2 captains and murdered them, assuming full command of the Legion. Sevatar gave an order to the Legion to break into 6 separate fleets and continue to spread terror in the name of Konrad Curze and to punish the hypocrite false emperor. As the fleets mustered to disembark, the Dark Angels appeared in system, launching an immediate offensive against the fractured Night Lords. Sevatar tried to penetrate the coma that his liege lay locked within, knowing that they needed his help now more than ever. Using his nascent psyker abilities that had been locked away, he was able to communicate with Curze and shake him from his coma. In a glorious last stand moment, Curze brought the fight directly to the Dark Angel's flagship, Invincible Reason. Baiting Sevatar and the Atramentar to follow him, they attacked directly at the head of the Serpent. The resulting conflict sees almost the entire Atramentar killed, spare a dozen or so, who are all imprisoned with Sevatar within the bowels of the ship. Konrad Curze is left stalking the shadows and deep confines of the flagship. For 16 weeks, he would evade the capture of the Lion aboard his own capital ship until they entered Macragge's home system and the capital of Imperium Secundus. Curze, being the wily, crafty bastard that he was, initiated a massive drop pod landing of every pod on the Invincible Reason, one of which he used to stow away onto the planet. There, he was able to plunge the city into chaos, rigging explosives and destroying huge swaths of the city. He was eventually pinned within the fortress of Hera by Roboute Guilliman and Lionel Johnson. The 3 fought in a wild duel, with Curze holding his ground quite well against the other 2. And this is a pretty big testament to the overall strength and fighting prowess of Curze. We've seen him best Dorn, albeit I have to assume Dorn's guard was down and it was kind of a cheap shot. He wins his fight against Corvus Corax, and he's able to 2v1 against Guilliman and the Lion like he's an older brother beating his younger siblings in a Halo Snipers Only match. He is 1-for-1 against the Lion, so that's worth saying. Both instances left the other almost dead. But in all honesty, he's one of the only Primarchs to have fought so many of his brothers. Even Angron doesn't get into as many tussles as Curze does, which is really, it's saying a lot. That is, until Vulcan shows up. After Curze detonates explosives throughout the fortress to bring the walls down on his brothers, he flees the scene, seeking out Guilliman's mother. Before Curze could murder her, though, Vulcan shows up, stark, raving mad, barely clothed, but with his hammer and a singular purpose: the destruction of Curze. Curze is beaten back and almost killed before Vulcan is put down. Now, to keep sending you to, not to keep sending you to another video, but the ultimate fate of Vulcan is described in that video on him and would only serve to confuse the purpose of this video, so I'll send you all there. But in the moments after Vulcan's defeat, Curze is sent into the warp by some bound demon. Honestly, it was a pretty weak point in the story, if you ask me. It felt a little cheated. It was kind of a very random point, and so I don't really have a very good conversation piece on it. But he spent multiple weeks in the warp before coming out again at the capital of Macragge in the dead of night. And he uses this opportunity to sneak into the throne room of the Emperor of Imperium Secundus, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels League. My two favorite Primarchs in one room? What could go wrong? A tense conversation took place, with the Night Haunter and the Great Angel toiling over the ultimate fate and reality of their visions. Like the Night Haunter, Sanguinius shared his brother's ability to scry into the future. Konrad knew that Sanguinius would die on the deck of Horus's flagship above Terra. On that very same coin, though, Sanguinius also knew full well the end that was fated to him. Personal philosophies, faith, and the decisions that they had made up to this point were all aired out to the two brothers. Curze, questioned by Sanguinius, did not give himself to the Khorne at Cygnus Prime. Sanguinius still firmly believed and had faith in the Emperor, though, believing that the Horus heresy was really nothing in the grand scheme of things. He knew what the Imperium would become. Curze offered his own life up to his brother, who, in turn, offered instead a path of redemption for Curze. Sanguinius pitied Curze, which I think both struck home and also angered the Night Haunter. Detonating an explosive and fleeing, Curze went on to unleash a campaign of terror on Macragge, sowing unrest among the populace of Imperium Secundus. Having been finally cornered in the Alma Mons region, the Night Haunter was captured by a joint ground attack and orbital bombardment by the Lion, an orbital bombardment that was made upon Guilliman's own people of Macragge. In a pure Batman moment, Lionel Johnson was Bane, ensuring him that while Curze used the darkness, the Lion was born and molded by it. Dropping the Primarch over his knee, he broke the Night Haunter's back. Not metaphorically, actually literally. The defeated and broken Dark King was brought before a trial of Sanguinius, Guilliman, and the Lion. In this grand trial, Konrad admitted to his crimes, brought to light the Lion's transgressions of bombing Macragge, and watched the Angel and Guilliman forsake the Lion before condemning the Night Haunter to death. Before the execution could be completed, the Lion told his gathered brothers that if Curze and Sanguinius' visions are true, then that is proof that the Emperor is still alive, that they must fly to Terra no matter the cost. Curze was then once again imprisoned upon the Invincible Reason, as the three combined fleets made their way to the throne world for what would become the Siege of Terra. But before the journey was complete, Sanguinius and Curze would take a detour to Davin, the very planet that Horus was brought to after being wounded by the Anathema, and tempted by the powers of chaos. What unfolded for Curze was probably the only moment in his life that he was not confidently sure what was going to happen. And I think that's an important characteristic of Konrad. His strength is derived from the confidence that he knows two things: what is coming next, and that his death is not at this moment. He has known from the start that he will die at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor. On Davin, nothing occurred as he had seen, because he did not have the ability to see it to begin with. The planet completely defied fate. This was a location where both the Angel and the Haunter could abandon the road that they were on for their own paths, set a course for the destiny that they desired, not the one that they were fated to walk. And this broke Curze. This is the first time we get to see Konrad lose it in a way that is completely uncharacteristic for not just him, but for a Primarch as a whole. Ultimately, Sanguinius decides to stay the course, declaring that to forestall what is to come would make him, in the end, someone that was worse than Horus. As the two return to the invincible reason, Sanguinius gives Curze a parting thought. The angel knows his death awaits him upon the vengeful spirit, but Curze's death comes from an undisclosed assassin at an undisclosed time. That means that he could be waiting millennia for that time. With that, the Dark King is jettisoned in his stasis coffin into space, as Sanguinius goes on to fight the Siege of Terra. Konrad Curze laments in the writings of The Dark, his own autobiography, of the envy he held for Sanguinius. Sanguinius and Curze were one and the same in a lot of ways. Had Sanguinius been born to Nostromo and Curze to Baal, would their fates have been different? Indeed, throughout the Primarch book, Konrad seems to speak highly, if not bitterly, of his brother Sanguinius. I think that there's an envy for the way the great angel willingly walked to his fated end versus Konrad skulking and waiting for it to come. In the many millennia after the Horus Heresy, Sagawalsa became the home of the Night Lords. Much of the fractured legion made their way there over time, with famous Night Lords such as Talos the Soul Hunter, all answering the call of the Dark King of the 8th Legion. Unfortunately, this is where the tale takes a very tragic turn. Konrad Curze was never mentally stable through any of what we talked about in the Horus Heresy and the latter portions of the Great Crusade, but now he has completely become unhinged. Building up a great fortress on the desolate planet, Curze constructed many wings and halls that would serve his depraved mind. Moments of lucidity could be seen through the crazed and hunched monster that the Night Haunter had become. He'd call out for Sevatar, saying that he would understand, and asking where he was, only for a scared legionnaire to remind him that Sevatar had been dead for years. Curze even made what he called the Screaming Gallery, which was something like an amphitheater entirely made of human flesh, flayed and kept living by some fell chaos magic. The impossible and innumerable screams of each individual that was skinned to make the hall echoed throughout the chamber perpetually. The Night Lords would continue their campaign of terror against the Emperor as Curze had wished it. You see, to Curze, the Emperor was a grand hypocrite. He believed that if the Emperor was to order the deaths of so many innocents and stand upon a pulpit of innocence himself, he was just as bad as the murderers that had now inhabited his legion. And Curze himself believed himself to be the great judge. If Leman Russ was the executioner, then he was the judge, and he would be the one that would exact vengeance and justice upon the many citizens of the Imperium. Curze hated everything that his father stood for. He hated the creature that his father had created in the Night Haunter himself. The entirety of the Konrad Curze book is told through a series of flashbacks, and at any point in the present is presented with Curze talking to a totem made of human body parts, a totem that he talks to as if it's the Emperor himself. And Curze believes that the great tragedy of his legion is that they do not realize their own hypocrisy as well, that they should all kill themselves before the end. By the end, he absolutely deplored each and every one of his sons, save for maybe the Soul Hunter, who had the strength to defy Curze, and Sevatar, who he was not even aware that was dead. The rest were cowards. He knew that when he died, they would all scramble for his artifacts or his power, each one lost to their own greed. This next bit is a spoiler for those of you that are or will read the Konrad Curze Primarch book. But in the closing chapter of the book, so if you are reading it, stop now, jump ahead like 2 minutes. But in the closing chapter of the book, the totem that Curze is screaming his confessions to is suddenly imbued with the light of the Emperor. Speaking to Curze, the voice of his father is heard clearly in his mind, bright light coming from the totem as father and son have one final conversation. It is a very interesting sentiment that the exchange delivers to us, the reader. The Emperor tells Curze that if Curze had come in for censure all those years ago, the Emperor would have shown him the light and he would have been okay. Curze rebukes that statement, but the Emperor presses on with probably the most harrowing line to Curze. After the Emperor forgives Konrad, he says, "You made one mistake, my son. From it, all the evil you have perpetuated springs. You chose to believe in immutable fate. Without choice, there is nothing. These gods that taunt us rely upon choice. The functioning of this universe depends upon choice. A single fate is one book in a library of illimitable futures. You read only one. Do you not see that you chose this? You chose to be fate's prisoner? Had you believed in your own agency, none of this would have come to pass. You made this happen. You chose to be the way you are, trapped, manipulated, insane. You determined what fate you trode. Your belief, my son, is nothing but an excuse for your own failings. And at that, the Emperor departs the flesh totem, and Curze's mind is left reeling. And admittedly, so was mine while reading that. Because throughout the book, you see Curze actively making choices that fall in line with the fated outcome of his visions versus the benevolent or altruistic path that he sees and could have taken. It's this final blow of tragedy that finally breaks poor Konrad Curze upon the rocks of his own mind. Departing for his arming chamber, he is armored and midnight clad and marches to his fated end in the Screaming Gallery. Having told all of his men to abandon the fortress or stay their sword from attacking the Calidus assassin M'Shen. As M'Shen enters the gallery, Konrad Curze delivers his famous final words.
Your presence does not surprise me, assassin. I have known of you ever since your craft entered the eastern fringes. Why did I not have you killed? Because your mission and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of all I have ever said or done. I merely punished those who had wronged, just as your false emperor now seeks to punish me. Death is nothing compared to vindication.
This brings an end to our grand tale of the Master of the 8th Legion. The Night Lords would go on to fight as scattered warbands across the galaxy. The famous Talos would hunt down M'Shen and earn a level of notoriety throughout the Legion, becoming probably the most well-known post-heresy Night Lord. But that's a tale for another video. The story of the Primarch of the Night Lords is a three-pronged one. The solitary and vindictive Night Haunter, the hunched-over, insane, and depraved Dark King, eating and slaughtering legionnaires, serf, and human alike, and the regal stature of a Primarch, Konrad Curze, the man that walked into the hall of the Screaming Gallery before his fateful end at the hands of M'Shen. The many publications talk about the constant flip between these three personas of Curze's: the lucidity of the Primarch, the unflinching justice of the Haunter, and the insanity of the Dark King. Whether alive or dead, the Night Lords continue their fight in the long war against the Corpse Emperor. They fight in midnight clad, with their master's name on their lips before each battle. Ave Dominus Nox. All hail the Lord of the Night. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me in this video here today. I know it was a long time coming, but I wanted to really hammer out the details of the most recent lore to make sure that this was as up to date as possible. I apologize that this was a little dense, and I did gloss over some of the finer points of a lot of the grander stories attached to this character, but I wanted to be able to deliver a succinct tale that was not too confusing by going down the rabbit hole of every single interaction that Curze has throughout his life. One last thing before we close this video out. With the launch of this video, I have just hit 50,000 subscribers. For all of you that have joined me on the journey thus far, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. It's been an absolute honor. For those of you joining, welcome to the family. In the wise words of Deckard Cain, stay a while and listen. For the next 50,000 subscribers, I can't wait to meet you. Thanks so much for watching here today, guys. As always, have a good one and take care.